Om Nidhaye Sarva Vidyanam Vishaje Bhavaroginam Gurave Sarva Lokanam Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Namah Shivaya. So I believe we have to continue with, I think it's number 4 here on my list. In any case, very nice question. It says, Gita says not to be attached to the fruit of our action. This is easier when it is a positive, in quotes, fruit. When the outcome is not favorable, its effect on us is longer. The worry it causes lasts longer, and all of this is difficult to overcome. How can we be better in such situations? Okay. So this has to do with karma and its results. I'd like to clarify, of course, one point here. So, which is, it says this easier when the fruit of action is a positive fruit. Then things are easier. So here, by positive, I'm assuming we mean a person generally means what I'm asking for. If I get, I see it as positive. What I'm asking for, if I don't get, I see it as negative. So it is the positive and negative part of it is really from the standpoint of the person who's asking, not from the standpoint of the result. Because sometimes, for example, I might ask for something, but I don't get what I ask. But in the long run, I realize that I am better off because I did not have the foresight to see certain things. So, somebody wants to travel and he goes on a flight, and something happens, some disaster happens or some problem happens. And then he says, oh, thank God I wasn't on that flight. Otherwise, many times you go on a plane, you have a particular flight and you go and sit there and your flight gets delayed. And then the subsequent flights going to the same place go before you and you're still sitting at the airport. So all kinds of things happen to us in life, which later on you realize, oh, thank God what I wanted did not happen, really speaking. So it was positive in the long run, but immediately it looked negative. Okay. So this is one thing that we are clear about, or we have to be clear about, is this whole positive and negative is subjective. So generally, it depends on how we understand karma and also how we understand prayers. So karma, of course, we all know I do something, I get a result. And then I want to go travel 100 miles. I want to get there, I have to travel 100 miles. So praying is not going to make it 80 miles. Okay. So certain things I know, I do, I get. There are a lot of unknown things. And then we pray. Your prayer is involved, suppose, in karma. Then prayer means we assume that what I am wanting is exactly what I should get, or I'm hoping to get at least. But that doesn't always happen that way. It may be positive, it may be negative. So if I'm clear about those things in my mind, then my whole attitude towards the result changes. It doesn't, to be attached to the fruit of action again, we what does that mean? How does that mean, to be attached to the fruit? Should I not expect any result? That's not possible. you know it's not, nobody does anything without expecting there to be a result. The whole point of doing any action is I expect some result. So that is what is meant by expecting a result. Now this, another issue connected to that is, what is my attitude towards the result? Sometimes it's expected what happens, sometimes what happens is unexpected. So how do I respond when the result is expected? How do I respond when the result is unexpected? Here specifically the question is, when the result is unexpected or not what I want, at least in the immediate moment, how am I supposed to respond? Normally we respond with disappointment and whatever else goes with it, depending on how much I want it. So that is the other thing that is implied here. The attachment to the result is the intensity of the expectation, one can say. You know, if it is very intense, then of course the disappointment is also going to be very intense. If it is very minimal, then my response is also going to be minimal. This is how the mind normally functions. But here, what happens? It's interesting. So, what actions here we are talking of in a spiritual pursuit, prayer, etc., are when they are involved. It's slightly now something else comes into the picture. When we talk of prayers, we are talking of variables, unknown variables. There are a lot of there are between what I do and what happens to me, the result that I get. There are known variables and unknown variables. The known variables are, for example, the effort I put in. Really, if I more effort I put in, if it's the proper effort, it is a sincere effort, and all those things are there, then the probability of the result is being there is more than if I don't put in any effort. So effort is one aspect of it. Then a patience also is necessary because time is involved. You don't immediately get the result always. Sometimes we do, sometimes the result takes time period in order to get. And then there are unknown variables. By unknown is unknown. I don't know. That unknown variables, even though they are unknown, the question is it arbitrary or is it orderly? Okay. In a general sense, that can always be a question. Oh no, how the result happens, it is all a chance, you know, and a chance. So one way to look at it is just happens, you don't know, you don't know. But then when you look around, when I look around me in the world, I find that things don't seem to happen that way. They don't happen randomly, Even though we have random concepts, they're relative. Really speaking, things don't function just randomly. The stars, the skies, the planets, the whole universe, there is an order there. So there is a meaningful order. Things work in a certain way. So, and there is no biases and prejudices except in some people's minds. But where the whole creation is concerned, it is orderly functioning. That is what we call laws. That's why we have science, in fact. Science is always trying to discover the order, even though they have chaos theory and all that. But really speaking, it's not trying to discover chaos. Discovering chaos is not going to be science. Science is discovering order. That is why they have laws in science. Eventually, they come up with rules and laws. That is all. You see that. So, which means there is an order. And so, here also, where karma is concerned, actions, reactions, results, there is also we we are inclined to accept that there is an order rather than accept that there is disorder or chaos based on our experience. So this in this order, but there are unknowns. These unknown variables, we also order, we assume some intelligence behind it. We assume there is a consciousness involved because there is such a thing as consciousness, which is what we are. And so it is meaningful and so on. So that is something which is beyond me, which is divine. I recognize that. I acknowledge that. So there is a divine order which is behind this order, okay, and which accounts for the unknown variables. And so that I address and I acknowledge by means of prayer. Okay? By means of prayer. Yes, we have learned from the scriptures and by tradition and by those who have come before us. And so what does this do? Well, this takes care of the certain obstacles that might be there in order to get a favorable result. Okay, a favorable result in the short run perhaps, but really speaking in the long run. We want things to be favorable to us in the long run also, not just in the short run. So when that is, and then what is this? So this obstacles to getting things, to getting favorable results, etc., with what we call as punyam and papam. So when I do prayers, then the prayers give me results in the form of punyam and papam. Okay. And now punyam, prayer gives punyam. Okay. Certain other actions give what we call as papam. Okay. Prayer doesn't give papam. Prayer always gives punyam. But so this punyam papam ideas are there. So which are papam results in obstacles? Punyam is favorable to what? To my not getting whatever I want, to my growth, to my spiritual growth, to my spiritual journey. Okay. That is how punyam helps me. Okay. Punyam doesn't always mean getting what I want, because we don't always know what is good for us. But the laws know, Bhagavan knows, the divine knows what is good for us. So when we think of punya, even though when we get things which look good, we say, oh, this is all punyam, which is true. All things which are bad, oh, this is all papam I must have done, in a general sense. But really speaking, punyam is always good for me. And papam has to connect it with things which are obstacles for me. But those we don't know which actions produces what more than in a general way. Specifically, we don't know which kind of prayer gives what kind of punyam, which results in which kind of obstacle, this, that, all those details we don't know. That is all part of the unknown variables. So what happens is when I perform actions, there are simple actions which are physical actions. Then there are certain types of actions which involve choice for us, for human beings, and right and wrong, dharma, adharma. When those kinds of actions we do, then the result is not just some immediate result, but also in the form of punyam and papam. Okay. And so those are unknown. That unknown, that becomes part of the unknown variable. And so that unknown variable, when the results come back to me, they also get influenced by this punyam and papam. And so which account for some of the unknown reasons why certain times we do things and they don't happen that way. They happen in their own way. Sometimes they happen in a way that doesn't look good for me. I think it's not good, but it ends up being good for me. So those are that is where punyam. Therefore, even when we say prayers, we always acknowledge this really. Mamopata samasta durita kshaya dwara. You know. So he says, we know anytime, even when I pray for something, in every prayer we say a sankalpa. Somebody had asked a question earlier. So how specific do we need to know, what we are praying for? Or I just pay general, oh Bhagavan, so you know everything. I don't need to know anything. So I have nothing to pray for. Well, is one kind of prayer. So you do whatever is good for me. It's a very general prayer. I'm not saying it's not a prayer. It's a general prayer. Okay. Or prayer can be very specific. So in what is specific, it's not for the benefit of Bhagavan that we are elaborating upon what I want. Of course, Bhagavan knows what we are all about. He knows what is in our heart, what is in our mind, but it is more for clarity in our own mind, that we have to know what we ask for, because sometimes we don't know what we are in the process of clarity. I also become clear about what I'm asking for. Sometimes, what happens? Then some situation comes up, and then I have a certain mind, and then I react, in my own mind. Okay. Now I want to express that. But then we hold back, we hold back. Why we hold back? Because when you think about it a little bit more, then the whole perception changes, you know. Well, that's why they say if you want to go shopping, what should you do? So make a list. They also make a list, Don't go shopping without making a list. Or if you go around and you see something and you want to buy, it's very expensive. Or it may be cheap also. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean we should waste money. We don't waste money only on expensive things. We also waste money on things which are not expensive, if I don't need it. So it says but if you see something and then it's going to, put a big dent on your finance, then don't just buy it. Think about it, Say next time, tomorrow I will buy. And then by the time you go there tomorrow, then your mind has processed it. You say, you know what, I really don't need this. I really don't need this. So those things are, so when we clarify things in our mind, we give it some time. Then in clarifying, in articulating, in expressing things, the priorities get redefined. And so we make better decisions. Prayer also is involved like that, so in seeking clarity in our own mind, so you don't ask for outlandish things. Even when we pray, prayer is a valuable, it is a sacred thing, prayer is not frivolous, that's why they say don't say God's name in vain, something like that they say. So in the sense, praying is not just so just simply don't pray for anything and it is certain value, it has a certain sanctity. So we become elaborate in our sankalpam. Sometimes the sankalpam takes so long. And sometimes if you look at these prayers, Vishnu Sahasranamam, look at some of these prayers that we have, even the results at the end of the prayer, they will give the results. And there's so many results they tell. This. It's not that we are seeking all those results. Not really that. But prayer identifies many types of results in the form of punyam. So, which all that means is we cannot equate one particular action to one particular punyam to one particular result. This is all the divine laws are there. They take care of things, but they are in order. There is no biases and prejudices in the eyes of divinity. With this understanding in our mind, now we perform actions. Yeah, coming back to actions. Prayer is part of action. Prayer is also an action, like any other action. So, like any other action gives results, prayers also give results. But they give results through this punyam, papam. Some of the actions that we do that involve choices, dharma, adharma, right, wrong, they also give results. So, through punyam, papam, it's called adrishta phalam. You know. So, immediate results, seen result may be there, physical results are there. That is called as drishta phalam. So, with this as the background, then now when I perform actions, then I have certain attitude towards the actions that I'm performing, and I have a certain attitude towards the results when I get it. That attitude towards both actions and results is what is called as karma yoga. This is what you are reading in Bhagavad Gita. You know. So both is an attitude in my actions. What is this particular attitude? In one word, if one has to say, just keep it in mind. It's called Ishwararpana Buddhi. So a mind in which I I recognize, I recognize the presence of Ishvara. So behind all these laws that are operating, the laws of karma, the laws of my actions, reactions, results, punyam, papam. All this is all this is an expression of Bhagavan, you know. And this recognition creates a certain attitude in me that what the result is going to come has the touch of divinity behind it. It is always there for everybody, whether we acknowledge it or not. But if we acknowledge it, then it gives us a certain strength and clarity and understanding and wisdom. If we don't acknowledge it, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It still happens. The laws work for everybody. But the person doesn't benefit from it, you know. So this is my attitude towards the actions that I do. What about the results now? Well, results come if it has the hands of Bhagavan behind it, then there what is the question of my acceptance or non-acceptance? I accept everything. And I accept everything with gratitude, with reverence, with respect, you know. I did my part. I do my best. I do what I believe is to be right. I seek to know what is right. And then I get a result. I'm not too concerned about whether it is what I want or what I don't want. I, of course, hope to get what I want. When I'm talking, I hope that the voice is getting across and there are no disturbances and so on, you know. So that's all fine. That is all part of doing an action. But then results sometimes, if I have too much attachment, in the sense, too much expectation based on my own personal subjectivity, not based on all this understanding, then my reaction is going to be different. So here I know I don't get cheated in the process. I don't feel shortchanged by the result. So it doesn't make me so upset. It's called glad acceptance. I gladly accept, like you accept prasadam from Bhagavan. Go to a temple, you make an offering, you offer the best that you can offer. And what I get back from the altar is a blessing. Is a blessing. You don't want, there's no specific expectation. You know, the expectation is to feel blessed. You know. And so I don't expect a particular type of prasadam, you know. Oh, I want this mango, I want that mango. The children will ask. You go to the thing and the priest is giving in a plate so many things, fruits are there. And the priest gives prasadam to you. And you get a prasadam, you know. Then your little one, so priest gives him something, then he will say, oh, can I have the orange? They can ask. They don't have that, but we don't do that because we understand what is prasadam. So that called prasada buddhi. The attitude towards the results is prasada buddhi. The attitude towards action is ishvararpana buddhi. These two things, if they are very clear in one's mind, one's life is karma yoga, you know, whatever one does. So, so I think that answers that one. How does one become a mumukshu? Mumukshu. So this is a term that is used, technical term, mumukshu. What does it mean? So the one who seeks moksha, the one who desires to have moksha is called mumukshu. Okay. Now the next question is, what is moksha? We've seen this. What is moksha? Okay. So as I have said before, that in religious pursuit, in order to understand even different religious ideas, spiritual pursuits, religious pursuits, whatever we want to call it. So we first define something as a problem, and then there is a solution, you know, because life is not simple fun and games. There are difficulties. We go through ups and downs, we go through sorrows, joys, all kinds of things are there. So different religious traditions define the problem in different ways. The problem of suffering, problem of limitations, and there are different theologies. And then according to how the problem is defined, then the solution is given. What's the original problem? How did it all start? So if the problem is a sin, then there's a solution is redemption, those kinds of things. Now, how we understand in our tradition, how do we understand this problem of a human being, fundamental problem? So we talk of it in terms of bondage. Bondage. No. What kind of bondage is this? It's a bondage, sense of bondage that a human being feels because I'm self aware. I'm aware of myself as an individual. I'm aware of what I'm going through. I have a self identity. So, based on my life experiences, I find myself to be limited in time, limited in knowledge. I find to be limited in my well being, in happiness. And all these limitations are not acceptable to me. That also I find myself. If they're all acceptable to me, it would be fine. There would be no problem. I'm as happy when I'm happy as I'm happy as when I'm sad. Suppose it was like that. What is this sadness and happiness? Why two things? Why not I just be happy? Both are natural. Both are natural. Everybody feels happy. Everybody feels sad. So it's all. So why this prejudice? This is the season of equity. Everybody talks of equity. We used to talk of equality. Now everybody is talking of equity. Equity means what? Yeah, equity means equal in every little way. There should be absolutely no extraneous factors that cause even an appearance of inequality. I don't know, whatever. So it's a complicated thinking. But it's not like that. There is happiness, there is sorrow. So how are you going to equate these two? Absolutely. You know. So, but we should be both should be the same. But both are not the same. My mind is content when it's happy. It is not content when it is not happy. Not everything organic is good for you. Not everything is natural is desirable. So it seems is somehow I don't want this. So anyway, these kinds of experiences I have, and so I find myself bound. But I also find myself wanting to be free from it. So we've defined these problems in terms of bondage and freedom. Now, how do I solve this? So we have a solution also, because I find that when I have these kinds of simple problems on a small scale, something makes me upset, something upset. Then I look for a solution. I feel ignorant. I don't know what's going on and I want to know. Then I'm seeking a solution how to know. So when these things happen, we find ways to solve the problem. I'm ignorant. So what do? Google. I go to Google. Google tells me everything. It doesn't give me knowledge. It just gives me information. Knowledge, I still have to figure out whether the information is right or wrong. Okay. Nobody gives knowledge. Nobody can give knowledge. Somebody can give information. You can give opinion. You can give your advice. Cannot give knowledge. Knowledge is something that happens inside. We acquire. You acquire information, and that information you have to process inside. Not all information is knowledge. Some of it is misinformation. There's a word for it. We call it misinformation. So my mind has to now figure out, is it information or misinformation? Google will never say, I give you misinformation. But some of that, lot of that information is misinformation. So we have to figure that out. So after I figure, then it becomes knowledge. Okay. So here problems I have, I'm looking for solutions. And I find little things I do that give me a solution. I'm upset about something. What should I do? They'll say, go buy something. There's one solution. If you're feeling sad, go to the mall, buy something, eat something, and then it works also. You feel good. Momentarily, you feel good. Because, the credit card fellows are smart. So they don't take immediately money from you. Even when you go buy, you think you're just picking it up. You don't even have to pay for it. It's a false sense of. Then the bill comes, so sometimes we don't even see the bill. And nowadays, even worse, because it's automatically connected to your account. Yeah. So you don't even feel you're paying. But you makes you feel good. Makes you feel good. So, like that, for problems, we have these kinds of transient solutions. That is not freedom. I continue to seek these simple problem solving things. I want some more money, I get some more money. Then I want some more money, I want still some more money. There is no end point. That end point, no end point means I am always wanting. I am always inadequate. It doesn't matter how much. After the initial absolute necessities of survival, everything else is just an addition, which is a temporary fix. It's not a final solution, leave alone a long term solution. Because I'm always at the end of all my acquisitions, I am still lacking inside as a person. Okay. So that's not working. We have a lifetime to prove it, to see it, to experience it. Then I realize that, okay, you know what? It is not that I want these small fixes. My problem is that I am a wanting person. I am limited. This sense of limitations, this sense of inadequacy, the sense of dissatisfaction, unfulfillment, this is the problem. Not whether I have this or I don't have that, or how I feel at a moment. Even at a moment I feel bad, that moment also goes. By the time I try to solve the problem, the problem is gone. They'll say like that. Nowadays, you feel sick, little bit you feel sick, you want to see the doctor. You call to make an appointment after 3 weeks. Then, okay, you're not that sick. So, okay, after 3 weeks. 3 weeks come. Then you're feeling fine now. So, the person who finds out, okay, this is the fundamental problem, is the wanting fellow that has to be got rid of, is the limited fellow that has to be taken care of. I want to be free, not free from the world, not free from people. I want to be free from within this sense of limitation that I have. That freedom is called as moksha. This moksha. Is there such a thing really? Or it's all made up? It is there. Our scriptures say it is there. Our ancestors believed it's there. Our ancestors believed they solved the problems. They achieved this, and there is a path, it's a beaten path of our ancestors because they traveled it. That's what's called a beaten path. There are others who have traveled it. Even when you travel, you take a beaten path. Yeah, because they're all there. So, in any case, it is for me to see, to travel it and see it. So, that that desire to be free from that sense of limitation is what is called as that freedom is called as moksha, and the desire to be free is called as mumukshutvam. And the person who has that desire is called as a mumukshu. Okay. How does one become a mumukshu? If you see in the growth process, they talk about this fourfold sadhana chatushtayam. This viveka vairagya shat sampatti mumukshutvam. So the whole thing starts first. How did it start? With a certain insight, with a certain understanding about life, about analyzing my experiences, based on which I reach certain conclusions. I recognize what is a fundamental issue here and how I've been trying to solve these problems. It's not working. All that is called viveka, called discrimination, a discriminative analysis of my life, of my actions, of the results that I get. It requires a certain degree of maturity and growth and life experiences, all of it. It's called viveka. It's a process. Then that viveka, what does that results in the understanding of the fundamental problem of limitation? I recognize that all these other simple superficial solutions that I was seeking, they don't seem to work. They have not worked, neither for me nor for others. So I lose, I'm not enamored by this anymore. That is what they call as vairagyam. So detachment, naturally, because they don't carry that same. I don't jump and go to the mall every time I feel upset because I know it doesn't work. You know, doesn't work in the long run. It doesn't work. So that is called as vairagyam, and all of this involves certain maturity, inner maturity, emotional maturity, etc. Some of those qualities are mentioned. All of this put together gives rise to what we call as mumukshutvam, or goes on to make a person a mumukshu. So mumukshu is just a certain, it's a way of describing a person, a mature person who has reached this point, and then this person seeks. How do you seek the solution to this? So by a means of knowledge, by a means of recognizing what is the nature of limitations, what is the nature of fullness, what is my nature, is it real, is it unreal, what is the end point, and how to get it. All this becomes, I have to seek a source of knowledge, and scripture becomes a source of knowledge. So that mumukshu then is called as a jignasu, the one who now has clarity about what he is seeking. And that solution is in the form of jignasa, or self knowledge, what we call as self knowledge. So, this is the how the process of spiritual growth occurs. It doesn't, this looks like a mountain climbing task, but really, this is all life. This is growth. We all grow through this. Everybody goes through this, knowingly or unknowingly. It's a process of growth. Everybody grows to different degrees. That's all. One can't assume that, the if you look at this, every child, when we are born, we grow. We are born to grow. Physically, we grow. Emotionally, we grow. Cognitively, we grow. Spiritually, also, we grow. Everybody grows. To what extent one grows is what makes difference. That each one has its own journey. Not everybody is on the same spot. That's all. But everybody is on the same line. That's all. There's some people in the front of us, some people behind us, many more in the front. So this is what the life's journey is. Okay. Next question. If I perform my duties without attachment, example, as a mother, daughter, sibling, friend, etc., am I considered a karma yogi? And can I attain moksha? Or is being sannyasi essential to reaching moksha? Okay. So again, these are certain terms that are used. Once the terms are clear, then it is kind of clear, what we are talking about. So a karma yogi, sannyasi. So we need to know what do we mean when we say karma yogi? What do we say mean when we say karma or karmi? A person, everybody performs karma. There is no living being that doesn't perform karma. Karma is an action. So everything, any living being performs an action. Even a tree performs actions. It grows, it moves. Based on the sun, all the leaves turn in the daytime. The sun, the flowers open and they close. Actions, karma is done by every living being. You know. So then what is the yogi aspect of it here? So when the karma takes on a certain character, then we call it karma yoga. And what was the character? That briefly I just explained earlier. This particular, a certain attitude towards the action, a certain attitude towards the result of the action is what we mean by karma yoga. The simple definition. Now, okay, so if I'm performing actions, performing my duties without attachment, what do I mean by that? So attachment is a desire, without there's a basis of, okay, this addresses the basis of my action. What prompts me to act? So I can broadly put it in two categories. We can create any kind of categories depending on how we want to look at things. So here I'm making it two categories. One is that prompts my action is my desires. Okay, my desires. Why do I do certain things? Because I have a desire for some reason based on I like to do my likes and dislikes. What is the basis? Likes and dislikes. There are things I like to do, I do. There are things I don't like to do, I avoid doing. Okay. So my actions are based on likes and dislikes. Is that the only way motivating? No, there is another important determinant, and that is for human beings. Okay. For human beings, not for other non human beings. Because we have this thing called choice. And in choice means it has to do with options. Okay. Remember, there has to be options. Without options, there's no choice. You know, you can't say, well, it's a choice you can't refuse. No, they say that. Somebody makes you an offer you can't refuse. What does that mean? It means that they're not giving you any option. You do what I tell you. You have a choice. Your choice is do what I'm telling you. Then what kind of a choice is that? There's no choice. Okay. So choice without options is no choice. But then in life, we have options are there. And I make a choice. So in options, there is a possibility that some options are better than other options. Either all are exactly the same or some are better than others. Then better, good and better and all, when these things come in, then right and wrong come in. It's all relative. So there's right and wrong. So this, when actions are based on right and wrong from a certain standpoint, what we call dharma adharma, to be done, not to be done. Certain things have to be done. The why of it, there's always a why. But then the reason why we do it is you recognize certain things and therefore we do it. It is not connected to our likes and dislikes. So that's what we call duties. Therefore, he said, if I perform my duties without attachment, again, without attachment here, we got to keep in mind, as a mother, I do things. As a father, I do things. Am I doing it without attachment or with attachment? How can I be a mother without attachment? You mean I should not be attached to my children? Nobody will be able to do that. Okay. That's not what it means. That have no feelings for your children. No, there the thing is, my motivating factor is not my personal likes and dislikes. You know, sometimes when the fellow is a brat, I don't like him. I don't like him. He's a brat. You have to learn, you should, whatever. But still, you don't punish him because I don't like what he did. Okay. So, what I'm saying is that it's not based on personal likes and dislikes. It's based on what is the right things to do, what is the wrong things to do. Kartavyam. It's called kartavyam in Sanskritam. To be done and not to be done that way. So when the basis of my actions is not likes and dislikes, raga dveshas. If it is likes and dislikes, we call it kamya karma, technical. These are all technical words. Kamya karma means an action born of my personal desires and preferences. Then I have actions I do, I make choices which are based on my understanding of right and wrong, dharma, adharma, based on kartavyam. This is what is to be done for the good of all, really speaking, for the good of all, for my long run, for my good, for the good of others. So he says, if I perform my duties as a duty, that attitude of kartavyam is called nishkama karma. A karma not prompted by kama. So it's not kamya karma, it's nishkama karma. Then is it karma yoga? Yes, that is karma yoga. And the person is called as a karma yogi. So, can I reach moksha? Of course, this is the one of the sadhanas, the means of getting to a point. Moksha, remember, has to do with my sense of bondage. So there is something else involved there of knowing, of recognizing myself and my relationship with the world, with God. Okay. Karma yoga is a certain framework of one's mind, of one's maturity. And that kind of a mind, a mature mind, a mumukshu's mind, a mind that wants to know, is a mind that is prepped and ready to gain this kind of self knowledge that is talked about. Okay. So, karma yoga is preparatory. Whole life of karma, because that's a maturing process that we talk about. But maturing itself is not moksha. Maturing is what gives me a mind that is ready to see things in a certain light, including the truth about myself. And that is called moksha. That is called moksha. So, generally, when they use the term sannyasi, sannyasi also refers used in a couple of different ways, the word. One is sannyasi is, for everybody, anyone who is born into this Vedika tradition, Vedika Dharma, which all of us are. So we have different stages of life. So as you know, as a student, then you live and but all of them involve a growth process. And ultimately, when one reaches a certain degree of maturity and seeks his self-knowledge, that pursuit is called as sannyasa. Sannyasa ashrama, that stage of life. We have four ashramas: brahmacharyam, then grahastha, vanaprastha, sannyasi. So that particular stage of one's life, including one's frame of mind, is what is called as sannyasa ashramam. Ashram is a stage. Then there are people who are sannyasis, the people who live a certain lifestyle where they don't go to work, they don't get married, they full time they are supposed to sit and pursue this spiritual path. They're supposed to do that. Okay. A person who does that, person who other things they do is not the one. Doesn't depend on what clothes you wear and all. But the person who has that commitment and pursuit is called as sannyasi. So that is a lifestyle. Then the word sannyasi is also used for a person. Sometimes the implication is that they've gone through the whole process and they have gained this knowledge and wisdom. And they are men of wisdom who may or may not be recognized by others. And so sometimes that word, that sannyasa, is equated to that. In Bhagavad Gita, it will be used in all these three different senses. Lokesmin vividha nishta pura prokta mayanaga, all that when he says, he talks about this lifestyle of sannyasa. Then Sri Krishna will mention chatur varnyam maya srishtam, guna karma vibhagashaha. Then he talks about these four ashramas that are there, stages of life. There he talks about sannyasa as one of the stages, ashrama. Then he talks about a jnani, you know, sita prajnaha. So such a person he calls a sannyasi. So it is used in the sense of a person who knows everything. So in life, sometimes we get mixed up with all these things. So that everybody who walks about in orange clothes, orange shirt, t-shirt, you say, oh, he's a sannyasi. Oh, that means he must know everything. And all those kinds of things is our own lack of clarity. That's all. But in these three senses, this word is used. And in all these three, you will see in Bhagavad Gita. Okay. So contextually, what it means. So now, just to finish up with this answer, so we know what is a karma yogi. Yeah, a karma yogi, the one who does one's actions with a certain attitude, is called as a karma yogi. And does one have to be a sannyasi? Well, if you're talking about a lifestyle, wearing certain clothes and things like that, then no, it's not necessary to be a sannyasi. If you're talking about an ashrama, a stage of life, is it necessary? Well, it is necessary in a sense. It is necessary not identified by clothes. It is necessary in terms of a stage of life, of maturity, a cognitive stage. That means one needs to be a mature person. Okay. One doesn't need to be an old person. So this doesn't have to do with after retirement and all that. But it has to do with a certain maturity that is important. And then does it mean that one who knows? Of course, more directly, it refers to the person once who has this knowledge, freedom, then that person also may be called as a sannyasi. But to be a sannyasi, do you have to be a sannyasi? No. But in order to be free, your freedom is sannyasa. Okay. So it's a different, contextually, we use it in different ways. The same word. So I think with this, I'll conclude for today, and then we will continue with some others next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.